I do have some prepared remarks, but I have to, first of all, let you know that my name is Jeff Torlina. I'm on the faculty here at, welcome, Kirkut. I'm so glad you made it. Right on time, too. In the behavioral science department, I'm a sociologist. Some of you may not recognize me, though, because I normally don't have a costume such as this. So, anyway, that was supposed to be a bit of a laugh. Maybe you'll take me seriously if you've got, if I've got a tie on and such.
Well, you're still wearing jeans, so you're true to your.
It's not exactly a complete picture. I realize this. So, welcome to our symposium on the economic system. This day-long event, which also concludes a follow-up session tomorrow from 1 till 3 o'clock in this room, is part of the 2011 Ethics Awareness Week, sponsored by the Utah Valley University Center for the Study of Ethics. My name is Jeff Torlina, Associate Professor of Sociology in the Behavioral Science Department, and I've been given complete freedom to organize this symposium according to my own agenda and standpoint, but I had nothing to do with the financial support, the advertising, or most of the arrangements for the logistics and the many details it takes to pull off an event like this. So for that, I must thank David Keller, Director of the Center for Ethics, and then Don Levange, the Administrator for the Center. Their commitment to making this event and the entire Ethics Week program a success is deep and selfless. The issues of which we will speak today are among the most important in each of our lives, and I thank them for the tremendous support over the past several months of planning. I also thank each of you in the audience for coming out this morning to take part in this discussion. Economics is rarely a popular topic in our society, and those of you who saw it important enough to spend your valuable time here with us today must be commended. I have optimism that our economic problems can be resolved, but that can only happen if we create a dialogue amongst ourselves and take civil action in our democratic institutions toward change. This event is hopefully just the beginning of a much larger movement toward reform that can only happen, as with any meaningful reform, from the grassroots. We are all in this together, and we must get this out together. We are in the midst of an economic crisis. Some of you may not have needed to hear that, but many of us know that all too well. Henry Paulson, the Secretary of Treasury in the George W. Bush administration, said in 2008, as the meltdown in the real estate market threatened to bring down the entire economy, he said that we were staring into the abyss, unquote. The abyss. Pardon me. According to Webster's second unabridged dictionary, the abyss is, and I quote, number one, a bottomless gulf. Number two, that which is immeasurable. Three, the bottomless pit, unquote. There were a few other definitions, but they were along those lines. Regardless of how little it is emphasized in our history lessons, the United States is no stranger to economic downturns, but this one was of an entirely new standard. It would threaten not only the livelihoods, the homes, and the everyday lives of Americans, but it would threaten the entire global economy. 3 years after Paulson's infamous words, lobbying by the commercial banking industry, along with the fact that the investment banks were the largest campaign contributors to the current presidential administration and to many of those in Congress, according to OpenSecrets.org, successfully kept the promised reforms of the practices that caused the 2008 meltdown off the table. We were promised all kinds of reform. We were promised that we would change the regulatory process to make sure this never happened, but those changes never happened. The Wall Street firms that were bailed out were back to profitability quickly, while the rest of the economy remains painfully anemic for most other sectors. The underlying structure of our economy has changed over the lifetimes of many of us. The misery that was faced by my hometown of Detroit as the manufacturing plants were closed down and moved overseas has spread across our nation, with factories closing and American jobs being transplanted to quote-unquote developing nations. Federal agricultural policy successfully drove nearly 30 million small-scale family farms off their land, and we now import most of our food from other countries. The productive apparatus of our economy is no longer here. The structural shift that has changed everything This is a structural shift. Not only do working class people no longer have jobs with livable wages, but our economic system is left to generate growth without creating value. Through creation of wealth, or capital, which, according to Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations, as well as many other of our classical economic theorists, can only happen through resource extraction and production, along with the processing of those materials into value-added goods, i.e. through labor, is now done in an artificial way. Our economy now generates profit through speculation in the stock market, by manipulation of foreign currencies, from compound interest on foreign and domestic loans, and above all, debt. The debt has occurred on all fronts: government debt, personal debt, and corporate debt. I'm not going to go deeply into any of these things because I'm sure it'll come up later. But the debt has occurred, on all fronts. Without the infusion of borrowed capital, our economy would have faltered years ago. It is dependent upon deficit spending to maintain the illusion of economic growth. This has been going on throughout the post-World War II period, and despite the rhetoric of the political campaign, it is not Obama's fault. It's not George Bush's fault. It is endemic of the system itself, and it transcends every presidency of the last 60 years. The evidence of economic instability is all around us, yet we have been trained to ignore the evidence that is before our eyes. We are told by investigators that reckless, even fraudulent practices on the part of investment banks were allowed to occur because government regulators did not do their jobs. Yet pro-corporate politicians are still claiming that what the economy needs is less regulation. We complain about the bloated government that is too big and that spends too much money that it doesn't have, yet we all want our taxes to go down. Most of our students are seeking jobs in the fields of education, healthcare, criminal justice, social work, the military, and other public sector industries, while at the same time they parrot the acknowledgement that government spending must shrink. Our economy has been in recession or depression almost as often as it has been growing since our nation was founded. Our leading exports are jobs, money, topsoil, and pollution. Yet people still have faith in the economic order. I just want to share a brief email I got in response to my canvassing many of our colleagues advertising for this symposium. And one of the people I sent an email announcement said, "In my view, and the view of other economists, the economy is not broken. My study of economic history convinces me that the type of degree of recession we are currently experiencing has occurred from time to time since the coming about of capitalism. Adam Smith certainly knew about recessions and depressions and, taking a supply side as opposed to a demand management or Keynesian approach, typified them as gluts in the market. He was opposed to government intervention to address the glut, but rather reposed his confidence in the innate and eventual ability of the economy to recover on its own. The current recession will eventually pass into history, as all previous ones have done, so that to typify the economy as broken is misleading." Well, economists do tell us that the current economic policies are right on track, but those that do have also drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak. They also have faith that assumes truths about our economy, even though the empirical evidence is staring them in the face that shows that the system is in trouble. Our financial institutions and our industrial sector, with the generous help of our government leaders who helped out with our taxpayer dollars and with the supportive policy, sent our industries and our jobs to China and elsewhere, yet we repeatedly hear those leaders questioning why we have a trade deficit with China. Duh. People love to quote Adam Smith to justify economic circumstances, but we must remember that Adam Smith lived over 200 years ago in a very different world than the one we live in today. His theories and his statements on the economy are just that, theory, not sacred scripture. Smith never lived in a capitalist state, but merely argued that a free market would be more efficient. He assumed a context for his ideas that does not exist anymore. Smith's arguments assume a smaller scale of production and consumption. Smith assumed that producers and consumers would have a direct relationship. He assumed that business owners would personally know their employees and their customers. He assumed that investors into the business would have a personal connection to the communities into which the products of industry would be consumed. He also assumed that the moral connections between citizens would be strong enough to regulate the individual actions in a socially constructive manner. That the people shared a deep commitment to the common good of humankind. Adam Smith's ideas work fairly well under those conditions, as well as any others that we've seen, the horrors of capitalism were recognized later by economic observers who witnessed the devastation caused by an unbridled free market. The free market must be regulated or it attacks itself, and it attacks the people on which it depends. Moreover, the notion of the guiding principle in which the independently regulates the free market, the quote-unquote invisible hand of supply and demand, it no longer exists. We have to wake up to this. Industrialists learned that in order to increase profits, which Adam Smith said could only be realized through labor, producers would have to squeeze more production out of each worker. By speeding up the production process through concentrating workers into more efficient groups, through machinery, and eventually with assembly line, by increasing efficiency, industrialists could reduce the per-unit production costs and therefore increase profit. They now have the technology to make commodities so efficiently that the cost of paying the workers to make them is covered in the first minutes of a worker's shift. How this impacts supply and demand is that producers now make their commodities in quantities that have nothing to do with the demand of the consumers. They want efficiency, speed, mass production, even if there is not the demand to warrant it. Demand, therefore, must be created. One of the things that industrial businesses must create alongside their actual products is demand itself. Demand doesn't come from consumers anymore, it comes from the producers. The foundations for the free market economy are gone. Supply and demand has been distorted, and the basis for capital accumulation, labor and its creation and transformation of the raw materials into value-added goods, has been exported. Our economy simply does not have the basic tools for economic growth that are required. Economic growth is another fantasy that ignores reality. Unlimited, infinite growth is presumed to be possible in a finite world, one which has limits on resources, markets, and living organisms. That is insane, and it ignores the basic facts of life on planet Earth. Our theories of the economy have been unhinged from reality. We have organized a symposium to realign theory and reality. We need to understand how our economy works. For real, not according to some fantasy, aka theory. The experts that we have gathered today will provide critique of the current system, they will point out the flaws, and by the end of the day, we will take their diverse standpoints and find consensus on how to resolve the inherent problems in our economy in order to identify what it takes to create prosperity in an economic institution which serves the needs and desires of humanity rather than the other way around. Of course, we cannot fix this broken economy simply by talking about it, but that is what we do as academics. We have the skills and the resources to analyze current events, to consider their origin and contexts, to logically deduce possible alternatives, and to communicate those findings. Our goal is to begin a dialogue, which is painfully absent in our current media environment and in our popular culture. It will not be easy to grow a culture of informed, critical debate on issues such as the complexities of economics, but we really have no choice. It is not only our lives that depend upon it, and increasingly the lives of all citizens of the earth, but it is also the lives of our grandchildren that we must struggle to resolve this crisis. Those of you that are here, by the very fact that you are sacrificing alternative plans for this time, are the heroes that we need to generate that discussion and to expand it to all of our communities. It is time that we, the people, stop being victims and assume our responsibilities as democratic citizens in this great and powerful country to influence policies and determine our own destinies and those of our generations to come. We must begin with an understanding of how the system operates and how that is the reason, that we have gathered here today some of the nation's most important economic thinkers. Leading off our analysis of the discussion today is Paul Maddock, professor of philosophy at Adelphi University on Long Island in New York. He is the author of several articles on the economic crisis and of the recent book, Business as Usual, The Economic Crisis and the Failure of Capitalism. He'll be followed by Randy Cook, president of the National Organization for Raw Material Economics at 11:30. Next will be Brian Check, president of the Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy, and author of Shoveling Fuel for Our Runaway Train at 1 o'clock. Wrapping up our individual presenters will be Harku Dartuk, professor of economics at the University of Utah at 2:30. The climax of the symposium, if you don't mind that word, can you say climax in Utah County? I hope so. The climax will be the plenary panel discussion in which they will all join in a mutual discussion that will seek consensus on the issues and, hopefully, a united voice which takes into consideration the merits and contributions of each perspective and unites them in a common voice on where to go next. As I try to share with my students, there are many ways of seeing the world. There are many truths, and just because we necessarily may disagree on details and on the way to define all of our problems, that allows a lot of room for truth. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are wrong if we don't agree with others, because there's the capacity for more than one perspective to be correct. And we just need to discuss our assumptions, our logic, and our evidence in order to find some mutual consensus. So each of these panelists has undergone great personal sacrifice to be with us here today. And they do so in order to share their expertise in an effort to put their shoulders to the wheel by giving what they can to make a difference. We must recognize them for that and thank them deeply for doing so. I also, once again, want to thank Don Levange and David Keller for making this event possible. We ought to thank my students for tolerating my distraction as I work to organize this symposium. And I also want to thank my wife for her extra efforts to cover for me as I devoted my time to this event rather than the maintenance of our household. Once again, I thank all of you for taking this seriously enough to be here, and I look forward to continuing the discussion in the weeks and months to come. Lastly, I wish to remind you that tomorrow's 1 o'clock session will focus on what we can do and what is being done to fix our economy here in our community. Identifying the problems that we do today are only meaningful if we do something about it, and it is at the local level where change must occur first.